The book of Isaiah. Isaiah was the prince among the prophets, the best of the bunch of the prophets. He is the most educated, most intelligent, and most articulate, maybe except for Daniel. He was the most influential of all the prophets. He administered in a place of high visibility and influential dignity, Jerusalem, the capital city of the nation of Judah. He is an aristocrat. His Hebrew is the finest of classic ancient Hebrew. He has a unique, elegant style. Like his colleagues in the North, Isaiah was passionately involved in the political life of his day. In many cases, he seemed to have direct access to the king, and so many well have been from a noble family himself. He lived through major crises, including the fall of Samaria in 722. But the oracles that have been preserved for us stress two of these events. One was the war declared jointly by King Hosea of northern Israel and the king of Damascus against Judah in 734. They wished to rebel against Assyrian rule, but were afraid of a hostile Judah at their back if it were not become their ally. When King Ahaz of Judah refused to join the rebellion, they decided to attack Judah first. The evil outcome of this event in the eyes of Isaiah was the tragic, desperate decision of Ahaz to call on Assyria to come to his aid, and thus to ally himself with the pagan faith of that country. Isaiah is married. His wife is described as the prophetess and may have shared his calling. His two sons are mentioned by name in the book. Isaiah 7:3, and the Lord said to Isaiah, "Go out to meet Ahaz, you and Shear-jashub your son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field." We read in chapter 8, verse 3, "And I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said to me, Call his name Maher-shalal-hash-baz." Let's look at an overview of the book of Isaiah. The Bible has 66 books. The Old Testament, 39. The New Testament, 27. Isaiah has 66 chapters. The first part has 39 chapters. The second part has 27. The Old Testament emphasis on law and judgment on those that disobey the law. It is the same in the first part of Isaiah. The second part of Isaiah is the same as the New Testament, grace of God in providing deliverance and mercy. Most glorious and vivid pictures of Messiah are found in Isaiah. Chapters 1 through 5. Although Jerusalem was not finally destroyed until 587 BC, the nation had, a century before, virtually reached the point of no return. God's people have rejected him, breaking the sacred covenant that bound them to him. And God is sickened by their moral degradation and social injustice and hypocrisy. We read in Isaiah 1:16, "Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes, cease to do evil." Verse 23 of chapter 1, "Your princes are rebels and companions of thieves." Everyone loves a bribe and runs after gifts. They do not bring justice to the fatherless, and the widow's cause does not come to them. Once faithful Jerusalem is behaving like a whore, utterly betraying God's trust. Jumping back to verse 21, how the faithful city has become a whore. She who was full of justice, righteousness lodged in her, but now murders. God's people are his enemies. Yet still God offers forgiveness. A swift and terrible judgment will fall on all those who continue to defy him. God will cleanse his people from their sins. Jumping back up to verse 1 of chapter 1, the vision of Isaiah the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. He ministered in the city of Jerusalem, which is the capital city of the nation Judah. The vision describes what God enables Isaiah to see in his mind's eye, the messages which God revealed. The book includes prophecies about foreign nations as well as Judah and Jerusalem. Isaiah's father, Amoz, is not to be confused with the prophet Amos. Isaiah has direct access to the king and the kings of the land. Verse 2 of chapter 1, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. Children have I reared and brought up, but they have rebelled against me. Earth and sky, heaven and earth, this is the language of an ancient Near Eastern overlord confronting subject kings who have broken the covenant. The prophecy of judgment on a nation. Geographically, Isaiah ministered in Jerusalem, which is the capital city of the nation Judah. Let's look at a segment of Hebrew history. Abraham and the patriarch, that seed of the Hebrew race, begins with Abraham. Moses and Joshua, the Exodus. Judges and Samuel, a transitional person between Judges and the Kings. Kings, Saul reigned for 40 years, then David for 40 years, and Solomon for 40 years. After 120 years of a united kingdom, about 930 BC, the nation split and experienced civil war for hundreds of years. The kingdom never again came back together intact. Some of the people went to the north and became known as the people of Israel. The capital was Samaria. And during those 209 years, there were 19 kings, not one of whom walked with God. There were prophets, but the kings were against God. Finally, the northern kingdom fell under Assyria in 722 BC, and the Assyrians nearly obliterated those tribes. At the same time in the south, for almost 350 years, there was another kingdom intact called the Kingdom of Judah. This is where Isaiah administered. The kingdom was in the finger of land that we know today as Israel, and the capital was Jerusalem. 4 kings reigned during his ministry as a prophet. There were 20 monarchs in those days for the people of Judah. There were 19 kings and 1 queen. There was 8 good monarchs, and there was also 12 wicked ones. Isaiah lived and ministered among both types, the good as well as the evil. During the 40 years he prophesied, Jotham reigned and was a godly man like his father. He prophesied during the time of Ahaz, one of Judah's worst kings. King Hezekiah died in 686 BC. Isaiah may have lived into the dark days of the evil king Manasseh. Hezekiah was succeeded by his son Manasseh, who ruled from 687 to 642. There is even a legend that Manasseh martyred the prophet Isaiah shortly after taking the throne. The reigns of these kings are recorded in Kings and Chronicles. Uzziah is found in 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 1 through 7, and also in 2 Chronicles chapter 26. Jotham is found in 2 Kings chapter 16 and 2 Chronicles chapter 28. Hezekiah is found in 2 Kings 18 through 20 and 2 Chronicles chapters 29 through 32. Socially, times were unusual. Isaiah was quite a man in affluence, education, and influence. His times were affluent times, not poverty times. We read in chapter 1, verse 4 of Isaiah, "O sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, offspring of evildoers, children who deal corruptly. They have forsaken the Lord, they have despised the Holy One of Israel, they are utterly estranged." Holy One, Holy God of Israel. This is Isaiah's special title for God, springing directly out of the vision which accompanied his call to be God's prophet in chapter 6. It is used only twice in other parts of the Bible. Chapter 1, verse 7 through 9. Your country lies desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. In your very presence, foreigners devour your land. It is desolate, as overthrown by foreigners. And the daughter of Zion is left like a booth in a vineyard, like a lodge in a cucumber field, like a besieged city. If the Lord of hosts had not left us a few survivors, we should have been like Sodom and become like Gomorrah. The Syrians have overrun Judah, destroying 46 cities. The northern kingdom of Israel has already fallen. Only Jerusalem, the daughter of Zion, remains. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, 2 utterly corrupt cities at the southern end of the Dead Sea, is described in Genesis 19. There could be no worse fate. These survivors, the theme of the faithful few, the remnant of God's people, is a key one in Isaiah. looking at Isaiah 3, chapter 3, verse 2. In that day the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the land shall be the pride and honor of the survivors of Israel. Chapter 3, verse 6 through 13. For a man will take hold of his brother in the house of his father, saying, You have a cloak, you shall be our leader, and this heap of ruins shall be under your rule. In that day he will speak out, saying, I will not be a healer. In my house there is neither bread nor cloak. You shall not make me leader of the people. For Jerusalem has stumbled, and Judah has fallen, because their speech and their deeds are against the Lord, defying his glorious presence. For the look on their faces bears witness against them. They proclaim their sin like Sodom. They do not hide it. Woe to them, for they have brought evil on themselves. Tell the righteous that it shall be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their deeds. Woe to the wicked, it shall be ill with them, for what his hands have dealt out shall be done to him. My people, infants are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, your guides mislead you, and they have swallowed up the course of your paths. The Lord has taken his place to contend. He stands to judge peoples. Let's turn over to chapter 10 and read verse 20 through 22. In that day the remnant of Israel and the survivors of the house of Jacob will no more lean on him who struck them, but will lean on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. A remnant will remain, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God. For though your people Israel be as the sand of the sea, and only a remnant of them will return, destruction is decreed, overflowing with righteousness. Again, the theme of the remnant in chapter 11, verse 10. In that day the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. Continuing, in that day the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the coastlands of the sea. He will raise a signal for the nations, and will assemble the banished of Israel, and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. The jealousy of Ephraim shall depart, and those who harass Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not be jealous of Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. But they shall swoop down on the shoulders of the Philistines in the west, and gather they shall plunder the people of the east. They shall put out their hand against Edom and Moab, and the Ammonites shall obey them. And the Lord will utterly destroy the ton of the sea of Egypt, and will wave his hand over the river with his scorching breath, and strike it into 7 channels, and he will lead people across in sandals. And there will be a highway from Assyria for the remnant that remains of his people, as there was for Israel when they came up from the land of Egypt. Let's flip over to Isaiah chapter 28:5. In that day, the Lord of hosts will be a crown of glory and a diadem of beauty to the remnant of his people. And then further back, chapter 37, verse 4. It may be that the Lord your God will hear the words of the Rabshakeh, whom his master the king of Assyria has sent to mock the living God, and will rebuke the words that the Lord your God has heard. Therefore, lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left. Let's look at the social times that Isaiah lives in, going back to chapter 1, verse 13. Bring no more vain offerings. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath and the calling of convocations I cannot endure in equity and solemn assembly. Keep in mind the new moon was the first day of each month, was a holiday. Verse 15 in chapter 1. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. 2 classes of people, extremely rich and extremely poor. Chapter 1, verses 16 through 24 indicts them for caring so little for those in need. Starting in verse 16, wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct oppression. Bring justice to the fatherless. Plead the widow's cause. Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall become like wool. If you are willing and obedient, you shall not eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall not be eaten by the sword, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Verses 21 through 24, talking about the unfaithful city. How the faithful city has become a whore, she who was full of justice, righteousness lodged in her, but now murders. Your silver has become dross, your best wine mixed with water. Your princesses are rebels and companions of thieves. Everyone loves a bribe and runs after gifts. They do not bring justice to the fatherless, and the widow's cause does not come to them. Therefore the Lord declares, the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel, I will get relief from my enemies and avenge myself on my foes. Scarlet, red as crimson, both are color fast. Only God could wash these out. Religiously, it was a nation of idolatry. They had adopted the Eastern cults. They had slipped away from the God of Hebrews. We read in chapter 1, verse 29, "For they shall be ashamed of the oaks that you desired, and you shall blush for the gardens that you have chosen." Oaks, the sacred groves where Canaanite rites took place, symbols of the nation's adultery. Let's compare Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 through 4, to Micah chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. Starting with Isaiah 2. "It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. And many peoples shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall decide disputes for many peoples. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more." Micah chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. "It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted up above the hills, and peoples shall flow to it. And many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples, and shall decide disputes for strong nations far away. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken." Turning back to Isaiah chapter 2, verse 6. "For you have rejected your people, the house of Jacob, because they are full of things from the east, and of fortune tellers like the Philistines, and strike hands with the children of foreigners." The practice of magic is forbidden in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 31, and foreign alliances both led to idolatry. Reading in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 31, "Do not turn to mediums or necromancers, do not seek them out, and so make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God."